The spark that lit the evening. The restaurant was alive with an energy unique to Saturday nights, an elegant hum of conversation, punctuated by laughter and the occasional chime of crystal glasses meeting in toast. Haven's Table, nestled in San Francisco's upscale Marina district, was a favorite among the city's elite. Here, deals were celebrated, anniversaries remembered, and friendships rekindled over gourmet meals and artisan cocktails. The soft strains of a jazz trio wove through the air, a perfect complement to the room's sophistication. Dimly lit sconces highlighted the restaurant's sleek interior, blending modern minimalism with warm, inviting tones. Every detail, from the hand-polished silverware to the personalized menus, exuded an air of exclusivity. Among the well-dressed patrons, Eleanor Hart stood out. Mid-50s, her presence commanded attention effortlessly. Her tailored dress, studded with understated luxury, whispered of old money. Every gesture, whether adjusting the silk scarf draped over her shoulder or swirling her glass of Bordeaux, was calculated to draw the eye. She was at ease in this world, where power often manifested not in loud commands but in subtle dominance. Seated with three close friends, Eleanor reveled in her self-proclaimed role as the group's queen. The women around her, though similarly polished, played supporting roles, their laughter chiming in to amplify her stories. Eleanor thrived on moments like this, weaving tales about her latest art acquisition or her upcoming gala appearances, carefully omitting any mention of vulnerability or failure. Across the room, a young waiter moved with quiet efficiency. His name tag read Andrew, and while his demeanor was unassuming, his presence didn't go unnoticed. Tall, with a slender build and an almost meditative calm, Andrew carried himself with precision. His white shirt and black apron were immaculate, his posture upright. Every step he took was deliberate, every action performed with a grace that belied the fast pace of his work. Andrew had worked at Haven's Table for 2 years, and while he enjoyed the discipline and structure, the job often felt like navigating a minefield. Patrons could be kind, dismissive, or downright cruel, and knowing when to smile, when to nod, and when to speak was a skill honed over countless nights. Tonight, he felt the weight of an unusually packed house and the eyes of many patrons on him. Still, his focus remained sharp. As Andrew approached Eleanor's table, she watched him with a gaze that made his skin prickle. She was the kind of customer who always found an angle, something to dissect, critique, or mock, all under the guise of lighthearted banter. Her voice, rich and deliberate, cut through the ambient noise as he neared. "Good evening, ladies," Andrew greeted, his tone even, his words polished. "May I offer you tonight's specials?" Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "Oh, do tell us, Andrew," she said, elongating his name in a way that felt almost patronizing. "Though I suppose you must recite these 100 times a night. I hope you don't get bored." Andrew maintained his composure, reciting the menu offerings with the precision of a seasoned professional. When he finished, Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Thank you, dear. Though I must ask," she continued, her tone laced with fox curiosity, "don't you ever feel misplaced? I mean, you seem a bit too serious for a place like this. Lighten up, won't you?" Her friends tittered, though their laughter felt strained. Andrew's lips curved into a polite smile, his eyes not meeting hers. "I'll do my best, ma'am. Can I get you anything to start?" "Oh, just the wine list for now. And don't forget to smile. It's good for tips," Eleanor quipped, eliciting a round of chuckles from her companions. Andrew nodded and stepped away, his back straight, his expression neutral. Behind the stoic exterior, his mind weighed. Encounters like this weren't rare, but they never failed to leave a bitter aftertaste. He had learned to compartmentalize moments of condescension, burying them beneath professionalism. As he moved between tables, delivering plates and refilling glasses, Andrew found himself the target of Eleanor's intermittent gaze. She seemed to be watching him, measuring him, waiting for an opportunity to engage again. For Eleanor, Andrew wasn't just a server. He was a fleeting distraction in an evening she had already deemed unremarkable. His quiet demeanor and deliberate movements intrigued her in a way she wouldn't admit. It wasn't respect. It was curiosity tinged with superiority. Who was he, this young man who carried himself as if impervious to her jabs? Did he think himself above this role? And if so, what was he doing here? The night unfolded with a rhythm familiar to Haven's table, but a subtle tension brewed at Eleanor's corner of the room. She continued her performance for her friends, but her focus kept drifting back to Andrew. She made a game of observing him, noting his precise movements, his calm demeanor. The wine in her glass dwindled, her inhibitions lowering with each sip. When Andrew returned to clear the appetizer plates, Eleanor seized her chance. "Tell me, Andrew," she began, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby tables might overhear. "Do you have any hidden talents, or are you just good at balancing trays?" The comment was met with soft laughter from her companions, though one shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Andrew paused, stacking the plates with practiced ease. He didn't look at Eleanor as he replied, "My focus is on doing my job well, Mom." "Oh, come now," Eleanor pressed, her smile widening. "Surely you have something more interesting to share. Perhaps a party trick, a joke, or maybe you can sing." Andrew's hand stilled briefly, his fingers tightening around a plate. He inhaled quietly before continuing his task, his face a mask of neutrality. "I wouldn't want to disrupt the evening, ma'am." Eleanor tilted her head, her smirk deepening. "Disrupt? Don't be ridiculous. I'm giving you the floor, dear. A little entertainment wouldn't hurt anyone." The table grew quieter, her friends exchanging uneasy glances. Andrew straightened, the plates balanced expertly in his hands. His gaze finally met Eleanor's, steady and unflinching. "Perhaps another time, ma'am," he said simply, and with that, he turned and walked away. Eleanor watched him retreat, her smirk faltering for the first time that evening. There was something in his eyes, something she couldn't place. Was it defiance? Resignation? She wasn't sure, but it unsettled her in a way she didn't expect. For the rest of the evening, she found herself distracted, her usual dominance over the table's conversation waning. Andrew's calm refusal had planted a seed of frustration, but also intrigue. Who was he, really? And why did her usual tactics seem to falter against him? The stage was set, and the night held more than either of them could anticipate. In the quiet corners of Haven's table, a storm was beginning to brew, one that would leave the room, and its occupants changed forever. The challenge unveiled. Eleanor Hart had never been one to let things go. She thrived on being the center of attention, and the faint, polite defiance in Andrew's eyes when he declined her request to entertain had only fueled her curiosity. She found herself replaying the moment as the evening stretched on, sipping her wine and watching him glide effortlessly between tables. There was something about him, a quiet confidence, a self-possession, that intrigued her. She couldn't decide if it was arrogance or integrity, but either way, it was a puzzle she felt compelled to solve. As the main courses arrived, Eleanor shifted in her seat, letting her fingers trail along the rim of her glass. Her friends were engrossed in their meals, the conversation having shifted to harmless gossip about mutual acquaintances. Eleanor participated half-heartedly, her mind elsewhere. She stole glances at Andrew, who was now helping a family across the room. His posture was perfect, his movements fluid. There was no trace of the tension she had tried to provoke earlier. He was maddeningly unbothered. "Eleanor, are you even listening?" her friend Veronica asked, arching a perfectly sculpted brow. Eleanor blinked, then forced a laugh. "Of course, darling. You were saying something about Margaret's disastrous choice of centerpiece." Veronica rolled her eyes good-naturedly, but Eleanor's distraction didn't go unnoticed. As the conversation moved on, Eleanor's attention drifted again, her gaze locking on Andrew as he made his way toward their table with a pitcher of water. She decided, then and there, that she wouldn't let the evening end without getting under his skin. "Back so soon, Andrew?" Eleanor asked as he approached, her tone light, but carrying an edge of challenge. You must be terribly busy tonight. Andrew smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. It's a lively evening, ma'am. I'm glad to see everyone enjoying themselves. Eleanor tilted her head, studying him. You know, I've been thinking about your earlier response. You seem like the type who's good at keeping secrets. Is that why you won't share your talents with us? Andrew poured water into the glasses with steady hands, his gaze focused on the task. I'm afraid I don't have any secrets worth sharing, ma'am, he replied, his voice calm. Eleanor wasn't satisfied. Oh, come now. Everyone has something. A hidden passion, a party trick, a story waiting to be told. Surely, you have one too. Andrew straightened, meeting her gaze with a steady calm that almost unnerved her. My story isn't nearly as interesting as yours, I'm sure. Her friends chuckled softly, sensing the tension. One of them, Cynthia, leaned over and murmured, Eleanor, maybe we should leave him alone. He's working. But Eleanor waved her off, her smile sharp. Nonsense. We're not bothering him, are we, Andrew? Andrew hesitated for the briefest of moments, then shook his head. Not at all, ma'am. Is there anything else I can assist you with? Yes, actually, Eleanor said, her eyes narrowing slightly. I've heard it said that people who've had to work hard in life, really hard, often develop remarkable talents. You strike me as someone who knows what that's like. So I'll ask again, can you sing? The question hung in the air, heavier this time. The table fell silent, and even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. Eleanor's friends exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Andrew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his expression remained composed. I'm not sure that would be appropriate, ma'am. Eleanor leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. Her voice softened, but the challenge in her tone was unmistakable. Don't be so serious, Andrew. It's just a bit of fun. Surely, you wouldn't deny us that. The discomfort in the room was palpable now. A few patrons at nearby tables had begun to take notice, their conversations faltering as they turned to observe the exchange. Even the jazz trio in the corner seemed to falter slightly, their melody dipping in volume. Eleanor, Cynthia said again, her voice firmer this time. This isn't. Please, Cynthia. Eleanor interrupted, raising a manicured hand to silence her. I'm simply curious. There's no harm in asking. Andrew stood still, his tray balanced against his hip. His eyes flickered around the room, taking in the curious stares, the tense expressions of Eleanor's friends, and the way Eleanor herself seemed to radiate both confidence and impatience. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the unspoken expectation that he either comply or walk away. For a few agonizing seconds, no one moved. Then, Andrew exhaled slowly and nodded. If it will make you happy, ma'am, he said quietly. Eleanor's smile widened, triumphant. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, their unease now overshadowed by a mix of curiosity and guilt. Around the room, diners turned their attention fully to the scene unfolding before them. Andrew set his tray down carefully on a nearby side table and stood tall, his hands resting at his sides. He took a deep breath, his eyes briefly closing as though he were centering himself. When he opened them, his gaze was calm but resolute. The first note he sang was soft, almost hesitant, a low, rich hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. The sound caught everyone off guard, silencing even the faintest whispers. As the melody unfolded, Andrew's voice grew stronger, filling the room with a resonance that was both haunting and beautiful. It wasn't just a song, it was an experience. His voice carried an emotional depth that transcended words, weaving a tapestry of longing, resilience, and hope. The lyrics, though simple, seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone present, stirring something raw and unspoken. At Eleanor's table, the transformation was immediate. The smirk vanished from her face, replaced by an expression of stunned disbelief. Her friends sat motionless, their eyes wide, their breaths held. Around the restaurant, patrons leaned forward, their faces softening with awe. Even the staff paused in their work, drawn in by the sheer power of Andrew's voice. The jazz trio set down their instruments, listening intently. A waitress by the kitchen door dabbed at her eyes. The chef, who had stepped out to see what was causing the unusual hush, stood frozen, his hands still clutching a towel. Andrew sang as though the world had fallen away, as though this moment was all that existed. His voice climbed higher, the notes trembling with a vulnerability that made the air feel electric. By the time he reached the final verse, the room was utterly still, every soul captivated by the raw beauty of his performance. As the last note faded, silence hung in the air like a held breath. Then, slowly, the sound of applause began to ripple through the room. It started hesitantly, as though no one wanted to disturb the magic of the moment, but it quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. Patrons stood, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. Andrew gave a small nod, his expression calm despite the emotion evident in his eyes. He retrieved his tray and turned toward the kitchen, walking away with the same measured grace he had carried all evening. At her table, Eleanor remained frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth as though to steady herself. Her mind raced, replaying the song, the way it had pierced through her confidence and left her feeling exposed. For the first time in years, she was speechless. Her friends exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of astonishment and discomfort. One of them whispered, "I had no idea." Eleanor didn't respond. She stared at the space where Andrew had stood, her chest tight, her thoughts tangled. She had sought to amuse herself at his expense, but instead he had revealed a truth she hadn't been prepared to face. That dignity and grace could shine even in the face of mockery, and that she had underestimated him, and perhaps herself. The applause gradually subsided, and the restaurant's usual rhythm resumed. But for Eleanor, the night was far from over. Echoes of the song. Eleanor Hart sat in the dim light of the restaurant, her hands resting on the edge of the table, as though the linen cloth beneath them might anchor her in place. The applause had long since faded, but the sound of Andrew's voice still lingered in her ears, resonating like the echo of a church bell after the chime. Around her, the restaurant hummed once more with muted conversations and the gentle clinking of silverware, yet for Eleanor, the world seemed strangely muted, as though viewed through a fogged window. Her three companions, still stunned by the unexpected performance, exchanged hesitant glances, unsure of how to restart the evening's rhythm. Veronica, ever the tactful one, broke the silence first. "Well, that was..." She trailed off, searching for the right word. "Unexpected." Cynthia nodded, her brow furrowed. "I didn't realize he had such a voice. It was powerful." "It was beautiful," murmured Michael, the quietest of the group. His gaze drifted toward the kitchen doors, through which Andrew had disappeared moments ago. "Remarkable. Really." Eleanor didn't respond. She stared down at the glass of wine before her, swirling its ruby contents absent-mindedly. Her carefully curated persona, the witty, unflappable socialite, felt as fragile as the crystal stem she held. The discomfort she'd felt earlier had morphed into something more profound, a churning mix of shame, curiosity, and self-reproach. She prided herself on being in control of every situation, on commanding the room with her sharp wit and confidence. But Andrew's performance had slipped past her defenses, exposing a vulnerability she hadn't even realized was there. "What's the matter, Eleanor?" Cynthia's voice broke through her thoughts. "You've gone quiet." Eleanor looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm just thinking." Veronica smirked, trying to lighten the mood. "Thinking. That's a first." The group laughed, but Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. She set her glass down with a quiet clink, folding her hands in her lap. "I wasn't expecting that," she said finally, her voice softer than usual. Michael leaned forward, his tone gentle. "None of us were, but maybe that's the point. People aren't always what they seem, are they? His words struck a chord, though Eleanor didn't show it. She merely nodded, her gaze drifting toward the kitchen doors again. In the kitchen, Andrew stood at the stainless steel counter, his hands gripping its edge as he steadied his breathing. The adrenaline from his impromptu performance had begun to ebb, leaving him feeling both exhilarated and exhausted. Around him, the kitchen buzzed with activity. Chefs shouted orders, line cooks moved with precision, and the rhythmic chop of knives filled the air. But Andrew barely registered the noise. "You okay?" Marco, one of the line cooks, asked as he slid a plate of seared scallops onto the pass. Andrew nodded, his expression calm but his thoughts swirling. "I'm fine. Just wasn't expecting that." Marco chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, you had the whole place floored. Even Chef came out to listen. That never happens." Andrew managed a small smile. "It wasn't planned." "Well, planned or not, you crushed it," Marco said, giving him a pat on the back before returning to his station. Andrew exhaled deeply, running a hand over his face. He hadn't wanted to sing. Not like that. Not as a spectacle for someone else's amusement. But once the moment had come, he hadn't been able to stop himself. Singing was part of who he was, a connection to his roots, his family, and the church choir where he'd first found his voice. It was both a refuge and a revelation, and tonight it had served as both. Still, the memory of Eleanor's initial mocking tone lingered like a bitter taste. He didn't regret singing, but he did regret the circumstances that had forced it. At the table, Eleanor finally broke her silence, her voice measured. "Do you think he's always been that talented, or did it come from something else?" "What do you mean?" Cynthia asked, tilting her head. Eleanor tapped her manicured nails against the table, her expression thoughtful. "You don't get that kind of depth in a voice without experiencing something. Something real. Pain, maybe. Or struggle." Michael nodded slowly. "I think you're right. Talent like that doesn't come out of nowhere. It's earned." Veronica frowned. "Eleanor, why does it matter? He's just a waiter." The words hung in the air, stark and jarring. Even Veronica seemed to realize she'd gone too far, her cheeks coloring slightly as Michael shot her a disapproving glance. "He's not just anything," Eleanor said quietly, surprising even herself with the intensity of her tone. She looked toward the kitchen again, as though expecting Andrew to reappear. "He's extraordinary." Her friends exchanged surprised glances. Eleanor was rarely so earnest, especially about someone she considered beneath her social standing. "Do you think you should say something to him?" Cynthia ventured after a pause. Eleanor hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to admitting when she was wrong, much less apologizing. But something about the evening had shifted her perspective. Andrew's voice had cut through her veneer of superiority, leaving her feeling exposed and, for the first time in a long time, humbled. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think I need to." Andrew's return. When Andrew finally emerged from the kitchen, the dining room had settled back into its usual rhythm. He approached Eleanor's table with his usual grace, his tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. Eleanor looked up at him, her usual confidence tempered by something softer. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Actually, yes," she said finally. "I wanted to thank you." Andrew raised an eyebrow, his expression neutral. "Thank me." "For the song," Eleanor said, her voice steady but quieter than usual. "It was extraordinary. You're extraordinary." Andrew inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the compliment without letting it land too deeply. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad you enjoyed it." Eleanor hesitated again, then said, "And I owe you an apology. For earlier, I wasn't kind, and you didn't deserve that." Andrew's gaze met hers, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Then he nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I appreciate that, ma'am." Eleanor felt a strange mix of relief and discomfort. She wasn't used to being vulnerable, but something about Andrew's quiet dignity demanded it. As Andrew moved on to the next table, Eleanor watched him go, feeling a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, a desire to be better. For the first time, she wondered what her privilege had cost her, and what it had cost others. A quiet reckoning. Later that night, Eleanor Hart sat alone in her sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The city lights twinkled outside, a glittering sea of possibility, but her focus was elsewhere. She nursed a glass of wine, the liquid untouched as she stared at the sleek, modern lines of her living room, a space curated to perfection, but suddenly feeling hollow. The evening's events replayed in her mind with an almost obsessive clarity. Her taunting words to Andrew, his calm composure, the breathtaking power of his voice. She had always thrived on being the center of attention. But tonight, for the first time in decades, someone else had stolen the spotlight, and rightfully so. She set the glass down with a soft clink and leaned back, closing her eyes. The memory of Andrew's song filled her again, its raw, haunting beauty stirring something deep within her. It wasn't just the voice, she realized. It was the emotion behind it. There was a weight to his performance, a depth that spoke of a life she couldn't begin to understand. Eleanor prided herself on her ability to read people, to assess them in seconds and decide their worth. She had done it to Andrew without hesitation, slotting him into a box labeled waiter, someone meant to serve her and little more. But when he had sung, he had shattered that box entirely. She stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out beneath her like a glittering tapestry. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, but she barely recognized the woman looking back. Memories resurface. As she gazed at her reflection, memories she hadn't summoned in years began to surface. Eleanor hadn't always been the confident, commanding woman she was now. She had grown up in a modest home in a small town, her parents scraping by to give her the opportunities they'd never had. Her father, a mechanic, used to hum old jazz tunes while he worked. Eleanor's earliest memories were of sitting in the garage, the smell of oil and metal filling the air as her father sang softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made their simple life feel abundant. "Music is the soul's truth," he would tell her. "You can't hide when you sing. It shows the world who you are." Eleanor had loved to sing, too, once upon a time. In church choirs, at school talent shows. Her voice wasn't extraordinary, but it was heartfelt. She remembered the joy it brought her, the way it made her feel connected to something larger than herself. But life had a way of dimming the light in people. Her ambition, her drive to escape the confines of her small town and make something of herself, had consumed her. She had traded her small-town roots for luxury and status, her father's wisdom for corporate strategies and designer labels. When had she stopped listening to music? She couldn't remember. A journal rediscovered. Eleanor turned away from the window and moved to her bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of volumes she rarely read. Among them was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and familiar. She pulled it out and flipped through the pages, the handwriting younger and less polished than hers was now. It was her journal from college, filled with dreams and aspirations she had long since forgotten. Toward the middle, she found an entry about a music professor who had encouraged her to pursue singing more seriously. He said I had something special, not the best voice, but something unique, something honest. I laughed it off, but part of me wanted to believe him. What would it be like to sing for a living? To pour my heart into every note? But that's not realistic, is it? I need a real career, something that will make money, give me security. Singing is a dream, not a plan. Eleanor's throat tightened as she read the words. Somewhere along the way, she had buried that dream, convinced herself it didn't matter. But hearing Andrew tonight had unearthed it, and with it, the realization of how far she had strayed from the person she once was. Andrew's world. Meanwhile, across the city, Andrew sat at his small kitchen table, the note Eleanor had left him resting beside a steaming cup of tea. He had read it 3 times, each word sinking in more deeply than he cared to admit. Your voice has a power I didn't expect. Thank you for reminding me what humility sounds like. Andrew wasn't sure what to make of it. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it felt like something close. He wondered if Eleanor even understood what she was apologizing for, or if her note was more about her own guilt than about him. He sipped his tea, his gaze drifting to the small bookshelf in the corner of the room. Among the cookbooks and thrift store novels was a photo of his mother, her arms around a teenage Andrew in front of their church. She had been the one to push him to sing, insisting his voice was a gift from God meant to be shared. Your voice can change hearts, Andrew, she had told him once, but only if you sing with truth. He had scoffed at the idea at the time, but tonight, as he had poured his soul into that song, he had felt the truth of her words. He hadn't sung for Eleanor or her friends, not really. He had sung for himself, for his mother, for the boy in that photo who had once believed in the power of music. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of Eleanor's mocking tone before he sang, the way she had looked at him as though he were less than her. He wondered if she had truly learned anything, or if her note was just a polite way of smoothing over the evening's awkwardness. A chance encounter. The next evening, Andrew was finishing his shift at Haven's table when he heard a familiar voice call his name. He turned to see Eleanor standing near the hostess station, her expression hesitant but determined. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his tone professional. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I was hoping to speak with you," Eleanor said. Andrew hesitated. He had no obligation to entertain her further, but something in her demeanor made him pause. She seemed different. "All right," he said. "I've got a few minutes." They stepped outside into the cool night air, the city bustling around them. Eleanor clasped her hands together, searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about last night," she began. "About what I said to you, and how I treated you. It wasn't right." Andrew said nothing, his expression unreadable. "I don't know why I said those things," she continued. "Maybe because it's easy. Easy to look at someone and make assumptions, to put them in a box that makes me feel better about myself." She looked down, her voice quieter. "But when you sang, you reminded me that people are so much more than the roles they play. You reminded me of things I'd forgotten about myself." Andrew studied her for a moment before responding. "And what are you going to do with that reminder?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected him to accept her apology, maybe even forgive her, but Andrew wasn't interested in absolution. He wanted accountability. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want to figure it out." Andrew nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Good, because words don't mean much without action." Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady. "You're right, and I will." As they parted ways, Eleanor felt a strange sense of clarity. Andrew's question lingered in her mind, urging her toward change. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar, hope, a ripple of change. Eleanor's heart didn't sleep much that night. The events of the past 2 days had ignited a restlessness within her that no amount of fine wine or luxury bedding could soothe. She wandered her penthouse in the early hours of the morning, the moonlight spilling through the vast windows like an uninvited guest. Each shadow seemed to whisper the same question Andrew had posed to her. "What are you going to do with that reminder?" She couldn't shake the clarity of his words. Eleanor had spent decades constructing a life of perfection, curating her surroundings and her social circle to reflect an image of success. But now, standing in her impeccably designed home, she felt like an imposter in her own life. The truth was unavoidable. She had used her wealth and status as a shield, a way to avoid confronting her own vulnerabilities. Andrew's song had shattered that illusion, exposing parts of her she had long buried. As dawn broke over the city, Eleanor made a decision. It wasn't enough to reflect on her behavior. She needed to act. For the first time in years, she felt the pull of something real, something that demanded more than surface-level gestures. The search for purpose. Eleanor spent the next few days immersing herself in research. She started small, looking up community organizations and outreach programs in the city. She discovered nonprofits dedicated to supporting underprivileged youth, providing them with opportunities in music and the arts. One organization, in particular, caught her attention: Voices Rising, a nonprofit that offered free music lessons, mentorship, and performance opportunities for young people in marginalized communities. The founder's story resonated with her, a former musician who had overcome immense struggles and dedicated his life to giving others a chance to be heard. Eleanor reached out, offering a sizable donation to the program, but the founder, Marcus Yates, suggested something different. "We appreciate financial support," Marcus said during their phone call, his voice warm but firm. "But what we really need are people willing to show up, to mentor, to share their time and energy. That's where the real change happens." Eleanor hesitated. Writing a check was easy. It required nothing more than her signature. But showing up, being present and vulnerable, was a different challenge altogether. "I'd like to help," she finally said. "How can I get involved?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Come down to the community center this weekend. We're hosting an open mic for the kids. It's a good place to start." The open mic night. The following Saturday, Eleanor found herself standing outside a modest building in the Mission District. The community center was a far cry from the sleek establishments she frequented, but there was a warmth to it that she couldn't ignore. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Kids of all ages milled about, some clutching sheet music or instruments, others chatting excitedly with mentors and friends. The room was simple: folding chairs arranged in rows, a small stage with a microphone, and a battered keyboard. But the enthusiasm was palpable. Eleanor felt out of place in her tailored outfit and designer shoes, but she was determined to see this through. Marcus spotted her almost immediately and greeted her with a wide grin. "Eleanor, glad you could make it." She smiled nervously. "Thanks for inviting me." Marcus led her through the room, introducing her to staff and volunteers. As she met the kids, their excitement and raw talent humbled her. They didn't care about appearances or status. They were here to share their voices and connect with others. The open mic began, and one by one, the kids took the stage. Some sang with confidence, their voices filling the room with joy and passion. Others were quieter, their nerves evident, but their bravery was undeniable. Eleanor watched in awe, her heart swelling with admiration. These kids weren't just performing. They were sharing pieces of themselves, unfiltered and real. A familiar voice. Toward the end of the night, Marcus stepped onto the stage to introduce a surprise guest. "We're lucky to have someone here tonight who knows a thing or two about using music to inspire. Please give a warm welcome to Andrew Carter." Eleanor's breath caught as Andrew walked onto the stage. He looked different outside the restaurant, more relaxed, his posture less formal. He glanced out at the crowd, his expression calm but focused. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady. "I'm honored to be here. I've always believed that music has the power to change lives, not just for the people who hear it, but for those who create it. So tonight, I'd like to share a song that's close to my heart." As Andrew began to sing, Eleanor felt the same electric energy she had experienced at the restaurant. His voice was just as powerful, but here, it felt even more profound. This wasn't a performance for an audience of strangers. It was a gift for a community that understood him. The room erupted in applause as he finished, and Eleanor found herself clapping harder than she had in years. A conversation rekindled. After the event, Eleanor approached Andrew, who was chatting with a group of kids. He noticed her and nodded politely. "Ms. Hart," he said, "didn't expect to see you here." "Eleanor," she corrected, offering a small smile. "And I didn't expect to see you either." He raised an eyebrow. "What brought you here?" "I wanted to do something meaningful," she admitted. "Something real." Andrew studied her for a moment before nodding. "It's a good place to start." She hesitated, then said, "Your voice. It's extraordinary, but it's more than that." The way you connect with people. It's a gift. Andrew shrugged. It's not just about me. It's about what the music represents. It's about giving people something to hold on to. Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. I think I'm starting to understand that. For the first time, Andrew smiled, not the polite, professional smile she had seen at the restaurant, but a genuine one. Then keep showing up, he said simply. The beginning of something new. That night, as Eleanor left the community center, she felt lighter than she had in years. She had taken the first step towards something real, something that mattered. For Andrew, seeing her there had been unexpected, but it reminded him of his own journey, the power of music to reach even the most unlikely hearts. Both of them, in their own ways, were beginning to understand the ripple effects of their actions. The world wasn't perfect, but it was full of possibilities. And sometimes, all it took to change a life was the courage to sing. The transformative echo. Weeks passed since Eleanor's first visit to the community center, and her life began to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Eleanor Hart who once thrived on the shallow validation of exclusive dinners and polished facades was slowly giving way to someone she barely recognized. She found herself returning to the community center, not as a benefactor with an inflated sense of superiority, but as a volunteer eager to contribute. Her transformation wasn't instantaneous, nor was it easy. It was a series of small moments, each one chipping away at the hardened layers she had built around herself. A humbling lesson. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Eleanor arrived at the community center to help with a songwriting workshop. She was greeted warmly by Marcus and the kids, who had grown used to seeing her around. Today's about storytelling, Marcus announced to the group, gesturing toward Eleanor. We've all got a story to tell, and sometimes the hardest part is finding the courage to share it. Eleanor's here to help us dig deep and put those stories into words. Eleanor froze. She had expected to help set up chairs or pass out snacks, not lead an activity. I'm not sure I'm qualified, she murmured to Marcus. Neither are any of us, Marcus replied with a grin, but we show up anyway. The kids looked at her expectantly, their notebooks open, pens poised. Taking the deep breath, Eleanor stepped forward. Okay, she began, her voice trembling slightly. Let's talk about moments that changed us, moments that made us who we are. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be honest. As they shared their stories, Eleanor found herself listening more intently than she had in years. The kids spoke about loss, resilience, and dreams bigger than their circumstances. Their vulnerability was breathtaking. When it was her turn, Eleanor hesitated. She glanced at Andrew, who had quietly joined the group and was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. His presence was grounding, a silent reminder of why she was there. I once thought success was about control, she admitted, her voice softer now, about being the one who set the rules. But I'm learning that real strength comes from connection, from letting go of the masks we wear. The room was silent for a moment, then a young girl raised her hand. Was it scary? She asked. Eleanor smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. Terrifying. But it's worth it. An unexpected collaboration. As the weeks turned into months, Eleanor and Andrew began to cross paths more frequently. While their initial interactions were cordial, a mutual respect began to grow. Andrew noticed Eleanor's willingness to learn, her genuine effort to contribute rather than dominate. Eleanor, in turn, admired Andrew's quiet confidence and his unwavering dedication to the community. One evening, Marcus approached them with an idea. We're planning a showcase for the kids, he explained, a way for them to share their work with the community. I'd like you two to collaborate on it. Eleanor blinked. Me? But I. You've been here long enough to know what this is about, Marcus interrupted gently. And Andrew, your voice has always been the heart of this place. Together, you could make something incredible. Andrew studied Eleanor for a moment before nodding. I'm in if she is. Eleanor hesitated, then took a deep breath. Okay, let's do it. The showcase, a night to remember. The showcase took place in a repurposed auditorium, filled with folding chairs, fairy lights, and the hum of anticipation. Families, friends, and community members packed the space, eager to see what the kids had created. Eleanor and Andrew worked tirelessly in the weeks leading up to the event. Eleanor handled logistics, leveraging her network to secure sponsorships and media coverage. Andrew focused on the creative side, mentoring the kids and helping them refine their performances. When the night arrived, Eleanor stood backstage, her heart pounding. She wasn't performing, but the weight of responsibility felt enormous. Andrew, sensing her nerves, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They've got this," he said simply. The performances were breathtaking. Each act was a testament to the kids' talent, courage, and growth. Some sang original songs, their voices trembling but determined. Others recited spoken-word poetry, their words cutting through the air like lightning. Eleanor watched from the wings, her chest tight with pride. This wasn't just a showcase, it was a celebration of voices that refused to be silenced. The final act. For the final act, Marcus stepped onto the stage to introduce a surprise duet. "Tonight, we've seen how music and storytelling can change lives," he said, his voice resonating through the room. "Now we'd like to close with a performance that embodies everything this community stands for." Andrew walked onto the stage, microphone in hand. A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. But when Eleanor appeared beside him, the room fell silent. She hadn't planned to sing, hadn't sung in years, but Andrew had convinced her during one of their late-night planning sessions. "You don't have to be perfect," he had said. "Just be real." As the music began, Eleanor's voice joined Andrew's in a tentative harmony. The song was simple but powerful, a call and response that blended Andrew's soulful resonance with Eleanor's softer tones. By the final chorus, the audience was on its feet, clapping and singing along. Eleanor's heart soared. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Echoes of change. The showcase was a resounding success, but its impact extended far beyond the applause. Donations poured in, ensuring the program's future. More importantly, the kids left that night with a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. For Eleanor, the experience was transformative. She continued to volunteer, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it brought her joy. Her relationship with Andrew deepened, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. One evening, as they cleaned up after another workshop, Andrew turned to Eleanor. "You've changed," he said, his tone warm but matter-of-fact. Eleanor smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. "So have you." He shook his head. "Nah. I've always been this way. You're just seeing it now." They laughed, the sound filling the quiet room like music. A new legacy. Years later, Eleanor would look back on that time as the turning point of her life. She had once believed her legacy would be defined by her wealth and status. But now, it was measured in lives touched, voices amplified, and connections forged. Andrew's voice, the catalyst for it all, remained a guiding force in the community. Together, they proved that even the smallest act of authenticity could ripple outward, creating waves of change. And in those echoes, Eleanor finally found her place, not above others, but among them.